1, 2, 3, and hey, Julie, we're recording. So, listeners, Julie and I are going to try to start something new for all of you. We're going to call it the Sunday Debrief at the Beach. I know it doesn't quite rhyme. I was trying, though.
Make him up with a better name. Stay tuned.
Make him up with a better name. But what Julie and I are going to be doing, well, I'll just tell you. So, every Sunday, Julie and I plant Zoe with her Nana, who lives with us, which is a blessing. And they usually do baking. They watch British baking shows. And who's that lady they watched with this heavy accent? The English lady?
Childs? What was
her name? Julia Childs, yeah. When I was growing up, my mom had the Julia. She had this huge selection. Lion had to be 100 Julia Childs, hardcover books. And she only made peanut butter and jelly. I literally never remember the books doing anything other than looking nice up on the bookshelf. But anyway.
The thought was there.
So she's continuing the tradition with our 6-year-old right now.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly.
Except they're watching on TV.
With Harry Potter in the background.
With Harry Potter in the background, exactly. So with Julie and I, we steal away every Sunday, and we go down to the beach, and we talk about the past week, and we talk about what we're going to be doing in the week ahead.
Talk about podcast stuff.
Yeah, talk about podcast stuff. We usually write podcasts. As you guys, well, maybe you do, maybe you don't. We're working on a new book. Harris Rules continues to sell out. And we had a really fun picture that someone sent us yesterday of the book, basically the last copy of the book on the shelves of Barnes & Noble, because I know they've been reordering in some of the big cities. But in any event, so if you, by the way, just shameless pitch here, if you haven't picked up our book, Harris Rules, you definitely want to do that. The 5-star reviews continue to pour in. I think we're close to 400 now on Amazon. In any event, back to Target here. So, Sunday Debrief at the Beach is what Julie and I have been doing for a long time. Before we moved here to Puerto Rico, it wasn't obviously at the beach. It may have been, if we were in Texas, it may have been at the barbecue or at the gun range.
That's right.
So, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sharing with you guys the conversations that she and I typically have on Sunday as we prepare for the week ahead. And we have no particular agenda. We have, we don't know whether you guys will like this or not, but it doesn't matter, because if you don't, you can just stop listening and just tune back in on Monday, and you can hear our normal ranting real estate coaching radio show. And if not, well, you guys can chill with us here on a Sunday. And so the thing that Julie and I were just talking about prior to me hitting the record button was, what's it like to live in Puerto Rico? Because Puerto Rico is far, far more, it's the extremes in the good and the bad way is the best way I can explain it. And it's difficult to try to explain to somebody who's not actually moved to what in essence is a foreign country. Yes, Puerto Rico is technically part of the United States, but it's not really. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that today. I thought we'd kind of just do that in a conversational tone. So, Julie, I have a question for you.
Sure.
All right, we can interview each other. How about
that?
Okay. All right, so what are the 3 things that surprised you on the upside of living in Puerto Rico?
That's a good question. I think one of the first things I noticed was how warm the water is. It's really awesome to be able to swim. I mean, here we are in February, and you don't have to wear a wetsuit, and the waves aren't generally trying to kill you. I mean, Zoe can go out probably 40 feet and be fine. I thought that was a pleasant surprise because, we've lived in beach areas before where the water was super cold half the year. So that was a pleasant surprise, I thought. How about you?
California, we're talking about you.
Yeah, California, we're talking. Yes, that's right. Brr.
So surprised me in the upside. I would say the people.
Yeah.
So of all the places we've lived, and Julie and I have been married for, we've been married for 29 years this year.
I know.
You know how shocking that is? I mean, to think about that. I mean, I met you.
We've been married longer than some of our listeners have been alive.
I know.
That's kind of.
But I met you when
odd.
I met Julie basically when she was 15, and started dating her when she was 16. And now you guys can do some. Well, actually, I'm not going to make the math easy on you, but let's say
they can figure it out.
Let's say that I'm going to be turning 40 for the 10th time this year.
Very soon, by the way.
So. Surprised me on the upside. I definitely say the people. Of all the places we've lived, the only place I can remember where the people were of this nature was Texas.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
People are generally very happy, and no matter where you are, it seems. You could be in the city, you can be on the beach. Generally jovial types and extremely helpful with things like speaking Spanglish. which is a requirement here, by the way.
Yep.
I would say I'm kind of surprised at how almost exactly 50-50 it feels. It feels like a half foreign country. You speak Spanish half the time. Even navigation switches back and forth between kilometers and miles.
It does.
It's interesting, but I think that has made it easier for us to transition. That it wasn't, full immersion.
Yeah, you'll be driving down the street, and then you'll see a sign in English, and then not even 5 minutes later, you'll see a sign in Spanish, and then you'll see a sign that's in English and Spanish. It's like
even when people are talking, if you overhear conversations on the beach, it's especially we might have teenagers in the beach cots next to us, and they literally will speak Spanish for like 3 minutes, and then switch to English for a sentence, and switch back, and they all understand each other perfectly.
And their English, by the way, is absolutely perfect. You don't even hear an accent. So, by the way, if you guys hear noise in the background, that is literally the ocean. So
and no, we can't mute it.
That's the Atlantic Ocean.
Right? Too bad.
We weren't kidding when we were calling this Sunday Debrief at the beach. So, Julie, next,
yes.
Remember we're coming up with 3 things. If this topic gets boring, we can always change. Right?
Yeah.
There's no agenda. Another thing that surprised you on the upside.
Surprised me on the upside. Well, for me, it's more personal stuff like Zoe's school and our gym that we work out at every morning. When we moved here, we were breaking up with Orange Theory involuntarily because there's one here, but it's too far for us to do every day or really any day. And we were pleasantly surprised, and now I think we're working out harder, and we have a lot of friends at the gym. So for me, it's more in the day-to-day creature comfort transitional types of things.
It was all here, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to work harder for certain things, like groceries, for example. We were just talking about everybody has their own little grocery hack to get the best produce and things of that nature, but that just adds to the adventure.
Yeah, if you guys have only traveled to the Caribbean and stayed in resorts, which is pretty much what our experiences were limited to prior to living here, you don't understand that when you're on an island, anything that they bring in is a little bit of a scarcity item, and anything they bring in is going to be fairly expensive. So if it's not a native, product, it's going to be something that's going to be usually 20% more than what you're used to paying back in the States. And that can go with all the way down to an orange,
Well, so like bananas are cheap, but grapes are expensive because the grapes come from California.
Right.
So
but they come from, I noticed that some of them come
Mexico
from Central America,
Yeah. But they're traveling a long way to get here.
Yeah, that's the other thing that's kind of interesting about products in general. There's all kinds of products you've never heard of before because they don't come from the mainland. Some of them are coming from Europe and all kinds of weird, strange beverages that I've never heard of before from like Italy and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you the other thing, and we're kind of saying the same thing, but on the upside, it is so shockingly easy to make friends here. Now, by here, Julie and I settled in an area called Dorado, Puerto Rico, which you guys can check out. And we researched just upwards and down. We traveled here, 4 times before we actually decided to move here. And we visited all the little hamlets and the villages and the beach towns and the communities and everything. And everything had its attributes. There wasn't really, it wasn't a smoking gun as to why you'd want to live in one place or the other. But I have to say, Dorado, and we specifically live in an area called the Reserve. It's it's a Ritz-Carlton community, and we'll talk to you guys what that means in a second. But this is probably one of the nicest places that we've ever been on the ever in the face of the earth. I mean,
in all of our travels.
Yeah, and Julie and I used to travel extensively. We call it PZ, pre-Zoe.
The PZ era.
The PZ era, which remember we've been married for almost 30 years, so she and I used to do a lot of traveling, and we'd go to Europe, we'd go just everywhere. And we, generally speaking, when we travel, we spoil ourselves in every place we've been. I guess maybe some places in France or some places in Italy would be similar, but really overall, Lake Como, there were some cool places there, but nothing's as nice as this.
I would say sometimes it reminds me of parts of California, parts of driving around reminds me of Hawaii, combination of things, but it's really its unique own flavor because of the Spanish aspect, I think, and it does have some European influence, like downtown San Juan is pretty amazing. It's a really interesting mixture of things, I think.
Downtown San Juan was built essentially when the Spanish basically were running the island, and as a result of that, you see...
The architecture is super cool.
It's just gorgeous. It's better than what you see in the pictures. A lot of you guys have been on cruises and stopped in San Juan and sort of walked around And if you are headed this way, make sure you think about visiting us in Dorado. So Ritz-Carlton, this Ritz-Carlton community, so if some of you listening know better than I, you can feel free to correct me, but from what I understand, there's 6 of these, 6 Ritz-Carlton reserve communities in the world, and what these essentially are, they're basically massive estates, and the history of this place is pretty phenomenal as far as, Julie can talk about that in a second. But in essence, what these are is they're reserves that are set aside for individual communities, and we live in one of those communities here in Puerto Rico, and they're also centered by it. The center of the community is a big resort, and by resort, I mean pretty much the nicest places you've ever seen before. I feel like I'm bragging, and that's not my intent. What I'm trying to do is motivate you guys to come visit us.
Well, and I mean, what do we do for a living, right? It's a real estate podcast, and I think just surely from a lifestyle, different ways you can live, it should be interesting to a lot of our listeners, the different types of neighborhoods, and we had a little ranch in Texas with cows and chickens. We've lived in condos. We've lived in the beach in Laguna Beach. I hope that it kind of tickles their real estate brain a little bit to imagine what a neighborhood like that can be like. It's different. I mean, it's got some country club aspects. It's got golf and things like that, but it also has, restaurants and stuff to do. And I think it's also interesting from how these guys run things. There's so much to do all the time, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's so easy to make friends. If you're bored here, that's on you. That's a you problem.
For sure.
So
yeah.
I just think it's interesting from that aspect.
Just for example, there's some ex-NFL football players that live here.
Yep.
There's obviously a lot of executives that live here. There's a lot of entrepreneurs, just entrepreneurs
Very
wall to wall.
entrepreneurial.
Very entrepreneurial. And they live down here. And I'm not going to, I don't think we should spend time talking about the tax incentives that Puerto Rico offers, but you should definitely explore it. If you're a business owner, if you can essentially be mobile, if your business is internet-based, if you can be a consultant, you will be shocked when you read about, in a good way, about what Puerto Rico has to offer as far as tax incentives. So you want to Google Puerto Rico, what would be Act 20 in Puerto Rico, Act 22,
yeah.
And then also Puerto Rico Act 60.
Yes.
So just research those on your own. I don't want to talk about taxes and all that while Julie and I are chilling at the beach. Oh, and just for the record, those cans you hear us open were not beers; those were Diet Cokes.
Yes. So.
All right, so this is a good opportunity to pivot and talk about things that were, we said surprises on the upside, so let's call this next question surprises on the downside.
Okay, I've got one.
Uh-oh.
OMG driving here. What is up with that? I joke with my school mom friends all the time about this. Something happens when people are on the road here. And there are driving moves that I didn't even know existed, and we watch Formula One every weekend.
Too.
Like turning left in front of somebody?
Yep.
How is that? It's just shocking. I don't even know. And not very many traffic lights, just crazy interchanges of, 5 different lanes coming you at the same time, all merging at a half roundabout. Like, who thought that one up?
So they don't pay...
It's insane.
We're not exaggerating when we tell you this, okay? So just remember we told you. And they don't pay attention to... They sort of pay attention to traffic lights. They definitely don't see traffic signs. By they, I mean anyone with a Puerto Rican driver's license.
Yes.
And including Julie and I, because we're Puerto Rican residents. And yes, we're learning to drive.
We're learning some of those moves.
We're learning some of we're learning to
goodness.
be more... So we were taught in the States to drive defensively. Nah, these people, the natives, they were taught to drive offensively.
Aggressively.
Aggressively offensive.
You have to be aggressive and still defensive all at the same time. It's very... There's no autopilot going on here.
No. There's no autopilot.
It's
Definitely.
crazy.
Oh, yeah. We have friends that brought their Teslas down. And basically, their Teslas, we see them in the parking lot in the corners rocking back and forth from so much
Can't handle
stress.
it.
Because the Teslas are so used to, they're designed to, if you put them on autopilot, to read predictable paint on the road. And
None
their
of that
algorithms, their algorithms have, monitored people driving all over the world.
And traffic lights, which don't really exist.
Right. And so you drop a Tesla with its little sort of snobby, I know how to drive better than you mindset in Puerto Rico, and I'm telling you,
No
the thing
way.
needs to go on Prozac inside a week.
Add to gas tank. Yeah. It's crazy.
It's going,
it's funny.
What are you doing? Send me home.
I was talking to one of my friends about this, and she said, how is it that people drive like that here? And then, let's say you encounter some of these driving experiences, and you're going to the grocery store. And yet, when people are at the grocery store, They have absolutely no situational awareness whatsoever, and just stand in the in the line and kind of have a little meetup. I don't know. It's very, like I was saying before, it's kind of 50% all on all the time, and then on the other hand, you have this really chill, probably because it's the Caribbean. Like, you can have an appointment, but that doesn't mean the appointment's going to happen.
Yep.
The same day, the same time, nothing. And yet, on the freeway, it's all urgency.
Oh, yeah.
So
the Caribbean time thing is
insane.
real, people. It's real.
Island time is a real thing.
Island time is real.
Or
yeah.
lack of time.
Yep. They operate on a different sort of, clock. I'm not really sure how it works. And, yeah. So our highly wired brains from, being doing
must
what
be
we've
on
done
time.
It must be on time. And they're like, dude, we said 5 o'clock. It doesn't mean 5. It means like 7. That's just the way we roll. So there's that.
Yeah.
I'll say the thing that really surprised me was, it depends where you want to live, obviously, but the cost of real estate, specifically in Dorado, specifically where Julie and I live, is similar to coastal California. In that, I mean, it's really freaking expensive. Yeah. So if you're coming from Laguna Beach, or you're coming from Newport, or you're coming from one of those really expensive areas, then it's not going to be so shocking. But it is a real surprise. Where this community where Julie and I live, if you want to buy a house that's livable, that you're not going to immediately have to put all kinds of money into, it's realistically at least $1.5 million, if you can find it, which you can't. There's no MLS here, so most of the things basically go pocket listed. In essence, whatever they call it. They don't call it pocket listing, but there's no implied buyer's agent's commission. So you're really, you're on your own. You have to basically you have to be able to figure out who the most dominant listing agents are, and then
do your own research.
And then really you can find a ton just from talking to people.
Yeah.
And that's how we did it. We found our place, wasn't on the market, was owned by a family that had owned it since it was original, 30 years ago. It was in exceptional condition. They had upgraded the bathrooms and the kitchens, and it's, for us, we felt like we got lucky getting it, and it still cost us near $2 million. But it's twice as much as what we sold our house for. Well, not quite, but basically twice as much as we've sold our little ranch for in Texas. And so here we are. I'll say, depending on where you want to live, and if you're going to live in Puerto Rico, you're going to want to live in probably Palmas del Mar, or you're going to want to live. I mean, there's Condado is good if you like vertical living and buildings and whatnot. But
depends on how urban you feel,
right,
and what your situation is.
Right. Remember, as far as drive times, to get to San Juan, it takes us a half hour, maybe 40 minutes. To get to the airport, it takes us a half hour. To get to the other side of the island, you guys heard those earthquakes that happened. The communities that were most adversely affected were 2 hours away in the southern part of the island. But there it is. It's 2 hours to drive from where we are, the north part of the island, down to the south part of the island, and you can go to it's not a big island, is what I'm trying to tell you.
And there is ocean everywhere, pretty much.
There is ocean everywhere. But like here in Dorado, in the Ritz-Carlton Reserve area, your average sale price is going to be within 12 months. And this is just because of a whole variety of reasons that are not necessarily tied to the United States. I would say probably over $3 million. There's houses that are selling privately here for over $10 million. Some of them are selling for over $20 million. There's beachfront, they call them villas, but we'd call them condos, that are selling privately for 15, 20 million. And a lot of these places people have purchased for like the original, people are making a lot of money in real estate down here is the moral of the story. So that combined with tax incentives makes this very attractive for people who are in the position to take advantage of them. It depends on what your employ is like. So yes, I would say that the cost of things, especially real estate, and I'll tell you just to pile on the cost of things, cars. Oh my gosh. So
Yeah.
Get this. This is how it really works, folks. If you bring in a car from the United States and it's not a plug-in hybrid, or if it's not electric, you're going to have to pay a tax just to bring it in, and the tax essentially starts at 31%, and the value of the car is determined by the government. And so what they'll do, because we brought a car in and we bought another one here, what they'll do is they'll go to essentially whatever the book they're using to assess value, and no matter how many miles or condition it's in, they're going to give it the highest value it possibly can have, and then they're going to drop 31% on that. And you think, well, there's a way out of it and there must be some gray area. There isn't. You bring in an older car, the tax is even more.
Yeah, it doesn't matter the age, you're still going to pay the tax.
And you pay more the
Varying
older it
degrees.
is. Because I was thinking, well, I'll be clever and I'll just bring in some old something or another.
Nope.
So, yeah, the import tax on cars is astronomical. Starts at 31%. So I want you to think about that. A lot of people, depending on what your tolerance is for cars. I mean, Julie and I like nice cars. So, yeah, suck it up, Buttercup. This is the bottom line. But some people will just, they'll give up on having a nice car and they'll just drive something that they don't give a hoot about just to avoid the taxes. But the other thing to do is to, and by the way, the taxes are assessed on all cars no matter what the value is if it's brought in. And if you buy a new car here, because there's plenty of new cars for sale here. There's Range Rover dealers, there's a Ferrari dealer, there's a Lamborghini dealer, there's every kind of high-end car manufacturer you can think of. But a new car has that tax tacked on top. So, for example, a friend of ours bought a new Ferrari. It was actually not even new. It was a 2017 Ferrari with no miles on it. And he paid what amounted to essentially $130,000 more than what he could have bought it for if he just bought it in Florida, So that's just the game. Now, the way out of it is to buy an electric car, a full EV like a Tesla, or buy, which people are doing. You see the Jags and whatnot down here, the F-Paces, or they'll buy a hybrid. And the hybrid plug-in hybrid is probably the best overall solution. And being a car nerd, I can tell you there's a lot of car manufacturers that are coming out with hybrids over the next 24 months. And I imagine you're going to see those everywhere in Puerto Rico. So, Julie, another surprise.
Well, and yet, what about property tax? Almost non-existent. So you pay it on the cars, but not on the houses. So there's another example of, how does that make sense? Sometimes here, sometimes not, depending on what you're talking about. You don't pay it that way. So other surprising things, gosh, I don't know. We've gone through the major list. I would say, the amount of private school education, pretty much everybody goes to a private school and the quality's good. The doctors here are super educated.
So let's hover there, because those are two things that both surprised me on the upside too. So our daughter goes to this private school, and Julie, why don't you talk about it?
So I always laugh because their slogan is educating future global leaders. And I just imagine these little kids going past that billboard on the way to school thinking, okay, there's no pressure there, is there? But they're serious about it, educating future global leaders. And so she has a very rigorous schedule and is in Spanish for 3 hours a day, every day. She's tested. She has Spanish dictation we have to practice. We probably have close to an hour of homework every night. She's in kindergarten. God help us, in first grade. I don't know. One of my friends has a 7th grader that's in calculus? I don't know. So, but, the teachers are excellent. They're very tuned in. Mandatory teacher meetings all the time. She's taking judo. She's taking ceramics. She has a nature class. And then all the normal stuff, math and science and all the rest. Oh, here's an interesting thing that I think many of us probably would have benefited from as kids. Maybe some of our listeners had this experience. I don't know. It'd be interesting. Email us. So they have, it's either 3 or 4 performances every single year. So 1 performance per quarter. Every single kid in the entire school is involved in one way or the other. They're either designing the set, or they're acting, or they're singing, or they're dancing, or all of the above. And so I asked somebody about that, and they said, well, the philosophy is for kids to develop confidence and be able to present in front of a crowd without freaking out, to be able to speak in front of a crowd, to perform, whatever their thing may be. And they actually circulate them. So if you painted the set last quarter, you don't get to just keep doing that. You're going to be singing or dancing or performing, and you will be getting over it. So I think that's, a good thing.
Well, this school is, people here in Dorado, because there's so many people moving here. By a lot, I mean just a lot.
All the time.
And the fear is the school's not going to have room for kids because, it probably won't. We had our little girl, all this that Julie just described to you. Zoe's 6. She's in kindergarten, okay? So she's having all those experiences in kindergarten. But the school, so there's the same brand of school. It's called TASIS, right? It stands for the American School
in Switzerland.
And so there's one of these in Dorado. There's one of these in New York City, right?
Switzerland. There's a new one being built in Portugal. and I can't remember where the other one is. I think there's 4 of them.
Wasn't there one in
altogether.
France?
Maybe that's what it is. I always have to look that up.
Yeah.
The one in Switzerland totally looks like the Harry Potter castle.
Yeah.
And that's a boarding school. This is not a boarding school. But, I think the other thing that's going to be good for her is she's knowing kids from all over the world. One of her little friends is from Thailand. Of course, she's got lots of Puerto Rican little friends. But she's, let's see, somebody's from Germany, and it's interesting because those kids are having to have English tutors and Spanish tutors. One of them's from Finland. It's just an interesting variety of people.
So let's talk about these are all, as Julie and I are going through this list, it's funny, we're kind of talking about all the things we maybe wish we would have known before we moved here.
Yeah.
But it might just be the juxtaposition of it's maybe kind of interesting. So doctors here. So far, the schools the private schools especially are excellent. The people, for the most part, really are exceptionally good people, nice people. It's difficult to explain this unless you've ever lived where Julie and I lived. So we were originally from Columbus, Ohio. And in Columbus, Ohio, everyone sort of had they were a little bit aloof and not overtly friendly, and they're the niceties and things like that, the Midwestern thing. People aren't too demonstrative in the Midwest. But one of the things that was always a glue that kept people together was the really crappy winters.
Yeah.
And when you grew up in a place where the winter could be so bad that you'd need your neighbor to help you, which was not unusual in Columbus, you'd have to look out for your elderly neighbors. You'd have to you'd really have to be on the lookout. The nature of growing up in a community like that, where people are innately mindful of their neighbors just for the sake of not just coexistence and being neighborly, but for the sake of survival, that creates something really special in the culture. And I feel that here too, because this island has been devastated. The Maria, the hurricane, and then this place definitely
very tight knit. Our 2 Facebook pages that we use, so tight knit. When the earthquake happened, and we were like, all right, what's going on with the power? As long as you had those Facebook pages, you were tied in. People knew exactly what was going on.
She's talking about there's 2 private Facebook pages. One's called Dorado Damas, and the other's called Dorado Caballeros, right? And so the Damas site is pretty much where all the ladies go. And if you're a man, don't even try to get in; they won't let you in.
Nope.
Oh well,
Closed
actually,
door.
that's an interesting thing you bring up. So if you're going to live here, you absolutely have to have a backup generator. And I'm not talking a little camping generator. You have to have a proper generator in your house that essentially is probably diesel. We looked at diesel and propane. You definitely want diesel, just in our opinions. Easier to get, and the half-life of diesel is longer, so that if it stays in the tank, it doesn't degrade as much as propane would, and blah, blah, blah. But the main reason is because it's easier to get, and it's cheaper. Number 2, you want to have some sort of, we call it cisterns, because Julie and I are from the Midwest, but they call them water storage tanks here. And so we have a water storage tank. It's 600 gallons. If, we were stupid and the water was out, we'd have maybe a week's worth of water. And you're saying, well, what are you talking about? How can the water be out? Well, they don't have big, like, in-the-air water storage tanks like they have, water towers, was what they're called, that you have in most of the United States. So here, the water is all pumped. And the water's pumped through, obviously, pipes. And those, water pumps are powered by electricity, right? So if your electricity goes out, it doesn't take too long for your water to stop pumping. So electricity's out, you're maybe half hour before you've got no water in your pipes. And that's the way the whole island works. And so the smart move is to have your own backup water supply in case. And also, just nerding out on this, because Julie and I just went through this process, you definitely want to have a solar-powered hot water tank. The same reason, because if you ever were out electricity, like the longest we've been out, electricity sometimes, when it goes out, it's out for an average of 7 minutes. And if you have a backup diesel generator, you don't even know the electricity's out, because the generator kicks in, and the second the electricity goes off in the grid, you just don't know it's out. Yesterday or the day before, I was in our office in our house, and I heard the generator kick on, and I was like, I didn't even know the electricity was off. It was perfect. So what happens is, if you don't have backup electricity, you need to have backup water, but a hot water tank. So what we now have is a solar hot water tank. Never heard of it until we moved here. It's pretty slick. Goes on the roof. It's essentially, just as it sounds, solar heats the hot water. Hot water then basically is free. And that's something else you want to seriously consider if you live here. So what did we talk about? We talked about backup electricity through Jenny. We talked about backup water. I'm forgetting something. Oh, internet connectivity. So here's something crazy. As a result of Maria, the cell phone grid here, if that's even a correct way of using those two words together, is phenomenal. There's 5G on the island. There's fiber optic cable you can get at your house. So the actual infrastructure for the internet here is great. Now, one company is better than the other. Right now, it seems like Claro is better than, what's the other one?
Liberty.
Yeah, so we use Liberty, and we're going to switch to Claro. But Claro doesn't go down if the electricity's out. So if your internet connection goes out during an electrical brownout, let's call it, even if you have a backup generator, your routers might work, but you're not getting any internet, if that makes sense. So we're going to definitely do the Claro thing. And I'm not trying to freak all of you guys out, but these are things I wish we would have known prior to moving here, because it's one of those, like, that would have been nice to know.
Well, we had no idea it was an earthquake zone. That was kind of lack of research
hilarious
on our part. That was absolutely shocking at 6:30 in the morning. What's it been, about a month ago now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was hilarious.
It's
crazy.
yeah.
And
that was for real.
Right? 200 earthquakes?
Yeah. I mean, they're happening all the time. I it's part of my normal weather trolling that I look at. Right now they're all 3.5, so you don't really notice them. But I would say the difference between a 5 and the 6.5 that knocked the power out and made us have to camp and figure out things like generators and that's for real. And now we were going to do that anyway, being that hurricane season is a real thing as well. But that just kind of fast forwarded our plan. That's for real.
You're listening to us talk and you think we're crazy, but to have moved here, and I'm not going to lie and say that there weren't moments, especially during all the earthquakes, where we hadn't had that same thought. But the reality of it is, even when we lived in Texas, electricity went out. And in Texas, pretty much everything wanted to kill you.
Yes, the bugs.
The bugs, the snakes.
The mosquitoes.
If you lived down in Austin, it was the politics was trying to kill you. Oh, friendly joke.
Yeah. Stop emailing us about that.
The overindulgence in granola and Bernie Sanders. I mean, that's deadly. Those combinations of things. Not to mention all the marijuana down there.
Yeah.
But up in Georgetown, we lived 30 minutes north of Austin. Electricity would go out. You'd have, normal. You'd walk out the door and there would be a rattlesnake. That's no exaggeration. We had that happen a number of times.
I don't miss the things trying to kill you all the time.
And the mosquitoes, they were so big, they had their own shadows. Yep. The heat in the summer. So, and no matter where we lived, I mean, when Julie and I lived,
wasps.
We lived part-time in, Laguna Beach, like Julie said, and we were threatened by fires. How many times?
Well, I remember we saw them right out our window on the little hill next to us. And then, you remember we came home when we were also living in Vegas, and we drove home to Laguna, and we were driving, there were fires right next to us on the freeway. And then when we got home, there was like 1/8 of an inch of ash all over everything because, houses in California are not sealed up all that well. It's not like you have screens and gaskets. And, I mean, no matter where you live, we have coaching clients that, they dealt with Katrina or they dealt with, tornadoes, and there's stuff everywhere. It's just, I think that here, to your original point, just like people in the Midwest who have to know how a snowblower works, you just have to be smart and be vigilant and have your plan, have it together. I put together some emergency medicine box because, what if it's a bad storm and the palm trees make it so you can't leave the neighborhood because nobody sawed them up yet? I think it's just being smart. It's not freaking out. It's not being zombie apocalypse. It's just being a grown human that wants to take care of your family.
So let's talk a little bit about, here in Dorado, after Maria, and then let's go back and talk about the doctors too, because I think we need to know about that.
Sure.
So after Maria, most of the island was without electricity. I don't even know for how long.
It was like a long time, 3 months or something.
I think Dorado was 3 months, Julie, and I think other parts of the island was like a year.
I think you're right.
Yeah, it was really bad. So, but if you had a generator and you had your own water supply, because it rains here, probably every other day, not for a long time, but a little bit, you're good. You can have backup water and you'll figure it out, and people got back to life as normal. But the interesting thing that happened here in Dorado, so I told you guys this is centered around a Ritz-Carlton resort. Well, the Ritz-Carlton resort literally has its own massive water supply. It has this, it's called, I don't even know what they call it. There's this inner workings of the resort, we've driven our cart through there to see it. It's like, it looks like something out of a science fiction movie, because there's so many generators, there's so many diesel tanks, there's so many water storage tanks. So after Maria, the folks that were here, the residents like Julie and I, what they did is, and this is really goes to it's a testament to the Stubes who own all of this. Mm-hmm. They're just exceptionally good people. They started supplying drinking water and water to folks that lived here, and they also went around, and this wasn't widely, we learned this from people that were living here at the time, but they were going by and filling up people's diesel tanks too, so they had electricity. They were bringing in food, just everything. So what happened was this place was, it's amazing, and they really, really took care of the people that lived here. I don't know what happened in other parts of the island. You hear horror stories, but I haven't heard no first-hand horror stories. I just heard people saying, "Did you hear?" type things, which are usually not true. But here in Dorado, where we live, after Maria, which is basically the apocalypse, people got on, and it was back. The electricity was back, water was back. People got back to normal pretty quick here. And by the way, even after Maria, planes were flying. I think it was 2 days later. So, but Maria was the real deal. We've made so many local friends here, and they all tell us that it was just beyond anything you could possibly express. It's fascinating too. So the houses here, the houses that you see that are always featured on like CNN and whatnot after there's any kind of storm in Puerto Rico, are ones that are made of cinder block, and there's no rebar running through the cinder block. They're literally just stacked cinder block, or they're made of wood. And so the houses that they show being blown over and whatnot are those types of properties. And what they do after the storms happen, and we know this because one of our friends here is a big insurance broker, and so we asked him about why is it that some houses are made of poured concrete and the others aren't, and he said the ones that aren't obviously cost nothing to build. So what happens is the houses will fall over in essence, and then they just rebuild them out of the same cinder blocks. They're just laying there in a pile, and they rebuild them, and they go back to normal. Next storm that comes around, they do it again. But in other parts of the island, because the land is so mountainous, it's not the center part of this is a jungle. It's the only rainforest in the United States, Julie and I drove through it. It was just something out of Jurassic Park.
Leaves the size of sheets. It was incredible.
It was yeah. We'll go back through there and take pictures for you guys, but or you can go yourself. So what I'm trying to express to you is, at the end of the day, you have to choose wisely if you're going to live here, because it really does make a difference. If you're going to live in a more rural area, the quality of the construction of the homes, because the houses are built on in mudslide areas, so they're built on hills, they can't go in there and do poured concrete walls in a place where the topography won't allow the concrete truck. It's real simple stuff like that. That's what he told us. So the houses here in Dorado and a lot of the other parts of Puerto Rico are built to a standard that I've never been seen before. The concrete walls in the ceilings are 7 inches deep, 7 inches thick. It can rain here, the wind can be blowing here, and you don't even hear a thing that's going on outside.
You have to look outside to make sure that the rain that you think is happening is actually happening, because you can't hear it on the house. Yeah,
so we're used to thinking, well, a house built out of 4x6s is better than 2x4s, and da-da-da-da-da. But they don't. They're just building places here on a totally different level. The construction is faster when they do pour concrete. We've watched at some of these new houses. There's a subdivision near us. The houses start at $7 million. That we're watching get built, and inside the Ritz, and they are just they look like bomb shelters. They do.
Yeah, everything's out of cement. Even the steps on the inside are all cement all the way through, and it's so quiet.
And the what would you call it? The taste here, the style here is not like Miami or California. It's very European. It reminds us of places we've seen in Italy or things like that. It feels very the influence is definitely European and not American. And that's true with how they dress. That's true with how the music the island listens to, the food the island eats. It's not American influenced. It's
definitely European influenced.
Yeah, that's something else that's hard to express unless you've really traveled, or have a reference for that sort of thing. Anything else? Oh, doctors. You can talk about doctors.
Well, let's see. You have the normal drill. I don't know exactly the reason for all of this yet, but the normal deal is you call first to see if they're even open. Assuming they're open, then I figured out you have to then ask if the doctor's actually there, because it could just be their staff. Then you try and make an appointment. Some of them will take appointments, some of them won't. You show up and you wait. Okay, that's one version, and we've done that, and it's been fine, and Zoe's got a doctor that's very good there. Then there's another version, which is concierge medical care, where you have mobile doctors, and they're doctors that come to your house. Zoe had Dr. Marin come, 2 weeks ago, and they can prescribe on the spot. What did he tell you? Everything in his truck, he can do everything down to put a broken bone back together or something?
So a friend of ours
pretty awesome.
Was building a play set in his backyard.
This is a terrible story.
Accidentally cut off his 6-year-old daughter's finger. Ugh. And Dr. Marion basically, went there right away.
Sewed her back up?
Sewed her back up, and they took her to an orthopedic surgeon, and the surgeon basically got her back to normal, and she had to wear a cast for a while, but all's well. The point being is that...
So for $250, that's basically
what they charge for
what the house call is.
Yeah.
And then your prescription, then you're good to go. I like doing that better because I don't like sitting in a waiting room with a bunch of sick people, not knowing what time I'm going to get to see the doctor. But the medical care itself has been fine. It's just there's different ways of going about it. And again, this is one of those where if you go to the Damas website or you talk in the school parking lot, everybody's going to have their version of what's best. Most people have a combination of, doctors they like to go to for specialty things. A lot of kids have asthma here, for example. And then they have the mobile doc, which is great. Your kid gets sick on a Sunday morning. What are you going to do? I think in this sense it's better. I don't think we could have done that in Texas.
No, there's
just called and had a doctor show up at your house on Sunday morning.
Mobile docs in Texas.
So that's kind of good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, exactly.
So the doctors here are almost always come from really good schools in the mainland, and they're listen to me, mainland here, I said, in the United States. I'm sounding like a local, and they're almost always board certified. So they just the preference on or the focus on education here. Starts when the Puerto Ricans are young and they go to these really nice schools. And here's something that's very fascinating. Almost all the Puerto Ricans that we've run into that you have to ask if they're Puerto Rican usually because their English is just so perfect. And it's because a lot of them go, when they're in high school, they will actually go to boarding schools in the East Coast of the United States or in Europe. And so they have these you cannot hear an accent, and then you hear them talking in German and French and Spanish, and then you're like, oh yeah, I'm just a dumb American who only knows how to speak English.
Right.
You feel like an ignoramus. But that's it. So the doctors here are just really good. I'm sure there's some turds in the punch bowl, but for the most part they're really good. They're really great doctors. Very don't judge a book by its cover is something else I'll tell you, is that the exteriors of the buildings here, when you're outside of the reserve where we live or some of these other areas, they don't look that nice, but then as soon as you walk in, it's almost a joke for Julie and I. We were taking our clothes to a dry cleaner yesterday, and it was just a normal dry cleaner, but the outside of the building looked like something you'd see from Homeland with Carrie walking down the street, looking for a sniper.
A lot of them are still beat from hurricanes, and they just haven't been put back together.
And then you walk in, and it's like this enchanted little, it was beautiful.
Yeah, and even the gas station. I used to be afraid to go in there for like 2 or 3 weeks when we moved here and here. And then, I ran out of gas, so I had to go in, suck it up, Buttercup, and you go in, and it's like this nice decked out. There's a deli, a gourmet section.
Nice
there's
wine.
a wine section. Like, who knew? You'd never know that from outside.
Yes, Julie drives we got her a new Range Rover when we moved down here, and the guy in the gas station said, "We're out of premium. You want to come back later today?" Because he didn't want to see Julie put cheap gas in her Range Rover, but. Anyway,
I told him it was okay. I could eat junk food that day. but yeah, a lot of things are like that they just, the facades are a little shocking to get used to, and then you go in and everything's fine and nice. And it's also random. One building next to it will be totally rehabbed and somebody's invested in it, and then the one next to it will just be kind of a shell. So that's the nature of having the island beat by hurricanes now and then, I suppose.
There is a lot of when you drive. Julie and I have made a point of not just hauling up here too long because this place is like a parallel universe. It's so nice, and we do make a point of driving out of the Ritz on a regular basis, usually once or twice a week, not just out of Dorado, and we go exploring. And there are places in Puerto Rico which are really run down, and by run down, they're barrios. They look like slums. A lot of them are just little villages and hamlets that are you just pass through one to the other. And then you get out and you start walking around and you start talking to people. We just did this 2 weeks ago. We went to this little town that's nearby, and Julie's getting pretty efficient at Spanish, pretty fluent. She's taking lessons, and I'm picking it up from Julie. Fortunately, I'm going to have my Ask Julie translator.
I'm going to ask Zoe.
But,
she's ahead of me.
But yeah, there's just these 3 old ladies that we.
Oh yeah, we obviously were looking lost. We couldn't find the government office we were looking for.
They were just,
and they were just like so nice, like having 3 little Puerto Rican grandmas take care of you and point you the right direction. And I understood about half of what they were saying. Just super nice people, you know. I mean, you still, of course, you have to keep your wits about you. Any environment, you're going to have to be smart about, but. The default is to be helpful, not to like ignore you and set you off on your own to fend for yourself. The default is, you know,
help.
It's like a Puerto Rican Midwestern attitude in a way. So I think that's really nice. You know, it's definitely a mixture of experiences, that's for sure.
So I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
If now that we've been here for 7 months, where I think we've got pretty much everything figured out. There'll be new challenges
That's
tomorrow.
what we thought till the earthquake hit, but yeah. I think on the other side of that, I'd feel better about it.
So Puerto Rico,
Yeah.
and again, I'm not going to talk about this, but Puerto Rico has some really amazing tax incentives. What they're trying to do is bring down business owners and entrepreneurs who will obviously inject a lot of cash into the Puerto Rican economy just by their own consumption, but also by hiring people and expanding their businesses and things
that
of that
is
nature.
working. We've read reports on
yeah.
that. That absolutely has been successfully launched, and we can tell just by the people we meet that that's working.
Yeah, we've met so many new friends down here, and a lot of them were from California, high tax states. Those are the obvious folks that moved down here, and they'll just say, look, in California I had 3 employees because the cost of just having the employee, the taxes and the regulation, and now down here I have 20. And it's amazing. And so whoever it was originally, and we should research this, but came up with the concept of these acts is kind of genius. You make it so that the people who are most likely to basically create jobs and create opportunities for other people, you give them whatever incentive they need to have to get down here, because I'm not really sure. When we see people move down here, now we can kind of tell the people that have been here for a while versus not. You run into people that are new to the island, and they have the same, I suppose, deer in the headlights look we did 7 months ago. So we try to help them, and maybe this podcast that we're doing right now will do just that. But you got to not mess around with trying to incorporate yourself into the island. You can't try to make it like the East Coast or New York. And there's a kind of a funny joke that what happens to a lot of times is you'll have the men will want to move down here more than their wives will, because the wives would be coming from maybe the East Coast and they're used to their Soul Cycle and Starbucks is the joke. And there's a Starbucks very near here, but there's no Soul Cycle, And so what a lot of times happens is the man will want to come down here, obviously, because it'll be a huge advantage business-wise, tax-wise, and maybe he doesn't have to work as hard to take care of his family and take care of his everything, and it gives him a new impetus to build his business to the next level. And that's what you see a lot of times. These entrepreneurs, what they're doing is they're not just kicking back, they're actually talking about how they can essentially expand their businesses in Puerto Rico. It's, like I said, it's a genius thing. But sometimes it's the females, they come down here and they're not really wanting to incorporate that much, and we've run into that. Fortunately, Julie was a stud, and she didn't even act like that from day one, though she did have her moments of, I think, disbelief, as all of us have. We'll tell you a story another time how we were driving through downtown San Juan, and we turned a corner looking for a Starbucks, by the way, and right in front of us was probably about 6 or 10 wild hogs.
Right there in downtown.
They're in downtown.
Chowing down on some trash cans.
Yep, there it was.
Okie
Yep.
dokie.
Wild hogs, yeah. So there you go.
This is why you need a Range Rover, anyway.
But so if you're not ready to accept a different pace of life, if you're not willing to learn Spanish, if you're not really willing to accept the fact that even though this is part of the United States and Puerto Ricans are Americans, they don't really see themselves that way. Not all of them. The older ones do, but the younger ones, they definitely see themselves as Puerto Ricans first. You don't see any American flags here. Have you seen an American flag? Have you seen one?
I don't think so. It's certainly not like Texas, but...
No, but nothing's like Texas.
Yeah, well, but so, Tim, what you're talking about, I think it's something that resonates with me that I heard. I think I don't know who originally said this. It's a great little quote to remember. I heard it on a Joel Osteen podcast or something. And he said, if you struggle with things like what you describe, it's not like where I'm coming from. I don't have my soul cycle. I don't have this. I don't have that. He said, you just have to remember one thing, and that is to bloom where you are planted.
Yep.
And to embrace that. And, the Spanish thing, I think, is almost a tell. Like, if you're not at least trying to pick some stuff up, and you almost have to actively resist, considering that most of the street signs are in Spanish. And I think a lot of what I've picked up has just been like, you go to the grocery store and it's all in Spanish. Like, see fruits that I don't know what they are and I have to look it up. And if I'm at the deli and I have to order, some sandwich meat and cheese, I have to look up how to say 2 or 3 pounds of whatever I want. By not doing that, you're kind of getting in your own way, because it's not as hard as you think. I think the language is one thing, and I am very grateful that we can get away with Spanglish and that they're very forgiving with things like conjugating your verbs. But I think it's also like, driving around, getting out of your own neighborhood and going to school and doing school stuff and trying new things. So that's all I have to say about that. That's not to say that I haven't had my moments of, like, driving to school, there's packs of wild dogs occasionally, and there's chickens in the parking lot, and there are huge iguanas that are the size of a Volkswagen.
Yep.
Other than that,
the iguanas here are just like something from Jurassic Park. It's
seriously,
they're beautiful.
Spikes and everything.
The old ones are beautiful. They're different colors. Well, Julie said wild dogs. What they really are homeless dogs. After Maria, a lot of the dogs that were domesticated people's pets, they lost their homes.
They're called Satos.
They're called Satos, and there's a big. Julie and I are part of a charity that donates money to take care of these dogs.
The Sato Project.
And so these wild dogs, don't picture something crazy, because they're
not like hyenas or something.
Yeah, there's people's pets that basically got abandoned.
You can kind of tell what breeds they are. But, even then, people are being very proactive. Like, this weekend is something called the Spay-a-thon, and it's in, like, 8 different cities. And people, the vets have volunteered their time and the surgeries, and there are literally thousands of dogs getting spayed this weekend. People are trying to end the homeless dog issue that's cropped up.
I don't think technically spading will end the homeless dog issue. I think it'll end the dogs having sex issue.
Well, they can still do that. They just don't make puppies, right?
Oh, I don't know.
You know what spaying is,
Do you know
right?
anything about this?
Moving on.
So if anybody knows about that,
Good Lord.
well, keep it to yourself. We don't know.
I digress.
I don't think you digressed. I think I did.
Yeah.
I think
That's
that was
okay.
I think that was full digression. So for some reason we were sitting here, we're looking at the ocean and looking at little kids play on the beach. I'm thinking about Zoe.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a plane that just flew over in the distance over the ocean, and I was thinking about that's where and there's a cruise ship that's out there that we're looking at, and there's a big, what are those big ass birds called?
Pelicans.
Yeah, well, those things that size, those are still.
I'm not sure where you're pointing.
Yeah, I think those were
Something big. Pterodactyls.
Pterodactyls, yeah. But the planes, the direct air flights is out of the San Juan airport is probably as good as it was in Austin. You could take direct flights to most of Europe. You could take direct flights to Texas. Obviously, Florida. There's a direct.
It's an international airport. It's a real airport.
There's a direct flight that goes from here to Columbus, Ohio. Can you imagine that? There's a direct. I mean, it's amazing. But there's like Julie and I are going to Europe for the first time since Zoe was born this July, and there's direct flights right from here to Germany. So if you think you have to be somehow, and this is our perception too, like if you live on an island, don't you get a little bit crazy because you're just on the island? I couldn't even, other than the fact that there's ocean around us, I don't really perceive we're at an island. I don't feel locked in at all. And it's kind of fascinating to think, like when Julie and I lived in Georgetown, we lived in Las Vegas for a while, we lived in Columbus, Ohio, we lived in Southern California.
Well, I felt a little bit landlocked when we lived in Laguna Beach, just because, sure, you're 60 miles south of LA, but boy, was that a chore to get in and out of.
Yep,
you had to
3
set aside
hours.
the whole day.
Mm-hmm.
You were bordered on one side, of course, by the ocean, and the other side by desert. And, I think you can get that sense of isolation anywhere if you don't work at expanding your environment. And we're only talking about from our perspective. We've got friends that, they helicopter in for the weekend, and then they helicopter to their yacht, then they take the yacht to a different Caribbean island. So, we still have plenty of expansion of our own mindsets as well. It's just, I think you have to actively do it.
Should I tell them the story about the whale being born?
Yeah, that's a good story.
All right, we're going to end with this
So
story.
good for example.
We're going to end with this story. So we're sitting out at, what restaurant was it? What's Luis's called?
Barlovento.
Vento?
Barlovento.
We call it Luis's. It's
Yeah.
the guy that manages the place. So we're at Luis's, and we're sitting there looking at the ocean, and we're asking Luis, who's been here forever, asking him about whether he sees any, whales or whatnot. And Julie, you do know right now. There's
Yep.
what are the whales that are?
I can't remember exactly which breed of whales,
Humpbacks,
but there are.
aren't they?
I think there's 3 or 4. The whales are going by, and then there's also giant sea turtles that are nesting. We've gotten warnings in our email. If you see giant sea turtles nesting on the beach, don't mess with them. Call the authorities so they can, make sure they get back in safely. But back to your whale story.
So Luis was telling us a story, and we don't know this guy, so this is Anyway, the guy was as Luis's story goes. Remember, we were asking him about whales. The guy was flying in on his private jet from someplace in the mainland, and he's flying over the Atlantic Ocean, and he was looking out his window, and he was relatively close to Puerto Rico, and he looks down the ocean, because remember, the Caribbean, the water here is just unbelievably beautiful. I wish you guys were here looking at it with us right now, because it just is so. For us, it's like heaven, really.
It's stunning.
Yeah, and so he looks out the window and he sees a mama whale giving birth to a baby whale.
Yeah.
So he then tells his pilot, because he wasn't flying it himself, what's the point of having your own private jet if you have to, fly it yourself?
Good point.
So he had the pilot fly back over, and then fly a little bit lower, not to the point where the whale would hear it or be scared or anything. And the guy was able to watch this whale being born. Isn't that amazing? I mean, those are the types of experiences I promise you you don't have those in Columbus, Ohio.
Because our friend Jean and Nicole, they live out east in Palmas, and they snorkel and they see manatee right there with them.
You're thinking of Gene and his wife.
Or yeah,
manatees. Yeah, so
all kinds of interesting things.
These are the types of So if you guys like this podcast, I know it was an hour, and it was just Julie and I going back and forth. We didn't really have an agenda. We were gonna do more of these every Sunday, because we chill every Sunday anyway, and sitting with our Diet Cokes and looking at the ocean and being grateful. And I hope wherever you guys are in the world, you're experiencing something like this. So I guess if you were to ask me, the number one reason I moved down here is so I could have more moments like this with Julie and our family. That was really the main motivation for me. It wasn't money. It wasn't even lifestyle, though our lifestyle here is about 1,000 times better than it's ever been before. And our financial outlook, because the opportunities here. And frankly, I've rediscovered my entrepreneurialism like I've never experienced before, just because the people we're constantly surrounded by, environment matters. But really the main reason is because we wanted to spend more time together. We wanted to have an ability or a lifestyle that did not make it, like when we lived in Ohio, it was always work, looking forward to going someplace where you could relax. Well, now we live, 5 minutes to walk down to the beach?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we live in this just unbelievably beautiful place. We feel so blessed. I don't want to use the word lucky, because it wasn't really lucky. Kind of, luck does factor
Grateful
into it.
and blessed, and
and really, all of you, many of you, have been attached to Julie and I, pretty much our entire adult lives in one form or another, from selling real estate to writing books and speaking and all that. You guys, you're all part and parcel of helping us to get here, because you gave us the time of day and listened to what we had to say.
Yeah.
And so we really appreciate
that.
And thank you for that. So listen, we're going to continue this podcast series. Hopefully you guys like it. We're not going to make it any more formal. Hopefully you don't mind the noise in the background from the ocean. Have a fantastic day. This is Tim and Julie Harris signing off from Puerto Rico, Dorado Beach, Puerto Rico.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.